Okay, I am going to try to make this video much quicker than my normal videos. This is a tech choice review for popular tech cards and some less popular tech cards in Whitewoods. There are three main ways that you can get access to these tech cards, so you know what I'm talking about when I mention tech cards. The first is Asteria. So you can send a spell or trap from your hand or field to the graveyard, special summon a light spellcaster tuner from your deck. The second is Toy Soldier. So if you already control Box, you can add a level 4 light monster to your hand when this card is summoned. The third is Arciela, which can search either a Whitewoods card or any light spellcaster monster from your deck to your hand. So you can see some of these are more specific than others. And then an honorable mention is that if this card is synchro summoned, Diabel, Phoenix of the Whitewoods, using a tuner synchro monster, so the standard ladder is Arciela into Diabel, then you can target a spell or trap in your grave and add it to your hand. Now, this typically requires you to have drawn the card, which means it is not good because it's not guaranteed, or that basically you are playing the Fiendsmith engine so that you can make Beatrice and dump the target. Now, I think this is an honorable mention because anti-spell may end up being extremely useful in a board breaker format. Skill Drain is also very good in this deck, but anti-spell in particular, I think it is worth considering if you are on the Fiendsmith cards, that you could at least side Anti-Spell and Beatrice for when you know you're going first. Okay, now Woes and Legend, I will just briefly mention that I play them at 1, so you may see some variation in these because they are searchable and they aren't starters or good extenders on their own. I don't think you should play more of them. I play 3 Soldier, 3 Box, 1 Tank, and 1 Reinforcement of the Army. In any build, I can get away with it. Now, Valor and Nib. Basically, everyone who has played this deck knows that you can search Valor off of Arciela, but I highly recommend also adding Gallant Granite into your deck because this card searches Nib at the cost of just 2 level 4s. And then you can still turn it into a Link monster, like it can go into an SB, or it can be one of the things that goes into Moon of the Closed Heaven, or whatever. But what makes this good is that having these 2 cards in your hand, which is like the god combination of hand traps, allows you to break lots of different types of boards, even if Yubel does weird stuff like this card, where it tributes itself as cost. You can preemptively Valor it so that the Nib can resolve afterwards. And just in general, it's a good part of deck building to be able to diversify the different areas that your interruptions come from. So having things that are not just in your monster zone or Woes in your trap zone, but also in your hand is very good. So I think Gallant Granite is main deck worthy, and 1 Valor and 1 Nib, even in a power spell build, is also main deck worthy. I include Tractus here just to say that a lot of decks that play these cards play 3 Engraver, 1 Tractus, because you don't want to search the Engraver off the Tractus, because then you need an extra body, unless you are playing Sanctus, which some people do in the OCG, but it's very easy for us to generate additional bodies through the toy cards or a tuner bringing itself back, so we don't need to play this. You could play 1, 2, or even 3 Tractus, depending on the ratios of the rest of your deck. Now, I've gotten a lot of comments about cards that are basically just normal summons, and I think as a general rule of thumb, you should not be playing a card if it is a normal summon unless it is an extremely reliable win condition. Even if you don't draw a normal summon, you typically want to search the normal summon, like an Asteria, and then you will still use a normal summon. So I wouldn't play most cards like this just for that reason. So I would not play Denko. Ecclesia is interesting because you could play a Fallen of Albaz and then a Mirror Jade, and you can use your opponent's monster to bring out a Mirror Jade, and then you have Mirror Jade send. But that requires you to play Bricks and takes up 2 cards in your extra deck, so I would not play this. Connector is a card that can bring out the Aqua Dolphin when it is normal summoned, and Infernobles use this because they could rip the Droll from the opponent's hand. Except this doesn't work for us because when you search the Neospace Connector off the Toy Soldier, you already got Drolled, so this doesn't help, so I would not play this card. Riliona, the Magistus of Ver, is interesting because this can add this card, which fusion summons Iwas, and Iwas is basically a quick play change of heart, so that's very strong, but it requires you to play Bricks, so I would not play these cards. Then we have Shining Star Dragon, which is basically an out-of-turn synchro summon, And if you were playing a Synchro 12 build and you're using the Crimson Dragon package, I think this is a good extender that increases your ceiling, but it requires a lot of setup and it is not gas by itself. So I wouldn't play this card because it reduces your consistency, but it's not the worst thing in the world. Candina is a normal summon that searches for Trickstar Reincarnation. Now, if you played in Trickstar format, you may remember that the God combo was drilling your opponent and then using Reincarnation, so you banish your opponent's entire hand, and if you do, they draw the same number of cards, except they don't draw the cards because they've been drilled. But this requires you to have drilled your opponent, and so I would not play this. Then we have Jowgen, which is one of the few normal summons that is powerful enough that you could consider playing one of these in your side deck when you know that you're going to go first, because it is a floodgate. Iris Sword Soul is a very unusual card that I've covered in depth in some of my other combo videos, so I won't go into detail here. This is in a weird place because normally I would never play a card that is not gas or a non-engine card, just like I explained for Shining Star Dragon. But Iris Sword Soul is a little bit unusual because the condition for making this live, which is there being a monster whose effects are negated on the field, is the easiest thing in the world to do with your deck. If your deck does not do that, you are not playing this deck because you have to be able to cycle through your tuner monsters to be able to play this deck. And then this card can, if your opponent special summons from the deck, there we go. You can draw 2 cards, so this is particularly relevant in a hand trap build. If they special from the extra deck, you can destroy one of those monsters, and this is a level 8 monster, which means bridging into Synchro 12s, even if you are not on Centurion cards, is a lot easier to do. So this card is definitely not necessary, but it can be good if you're playing a Synchro 12 strategy or a lot of hand traps. Broomy is interesting because you can special summon it from the deck off of Asteria, and the only reason that I would play this card is because you can make Herald of the Arc Light, which is an Omni-Negate that I honestly do not think the deck needs, but it is also a pseudo floodgate because any monster sent from the hand or main deck to the graveyard is banished instead. So this card is good, and you could play it just for this card, but this is a brick, you don't want to draw it, so I personally would not play it. Then you have the Centurion cards, which I've covered in depth in other videos, so I won't go into them, but this is just to say that this is more of an engine rather than a tech choice. Now, if for some reason you love Dogmatica cards or you don't like playing meta, you could consider a card like Ecclesia, which can search Fleur, which is basically a hand trap in your opponent's turn, but also a level 8, which means that you can go into Synchro 12 plays. I don't think Maximus is as good, so if you are someone who loves Dogmatica or hates meta decks, I would probably skip the Maximus and just play the Ecclesia and the Fleur. Now, I have seen some combos with these cards, the Quem and the Cartesia, and I think there's some potential there, but I haven't tested it myself. So these 2 cards, I will say, are in the unknown potential category right now. Chicken Game, I've seen a lot of people talk about. It's one of the first cards I tested. I don't think this card is good. I think that you can consider it if you are on a heavy hand trap build. Now, the reason for this is just drawing 1 card off of Chicken Game is not good because you could have drawn any other card and you would have had that card already. So you have to resolve this card at least twice, but that means you have to draw off it, you have to send it, you have to bring it back off of Diabel, draw again, and then you need to remove it before your opponent gets to play. So some setup is required for this card to not be bad, and drawing into more engine generally does not help this deck because you only need a couple cards to cycle through everything, so drawing engine is redundant, drawing hand traps is better. So if you are on a heavy hand trap build, at least 14 or 15 hand traps, you could consider this. Bio Statue of the Heavens is similar to Jowgen, but you can still special summon light monsters, so you can turn it off very easily yourself. Again, this is a card that you could consider siding one of when you know you're going first. Thunder King Ryo, so interesting floodgate. Neither player can add cards from their deck to their hand except by drawing them. Also, it can negate inherent summons. You could also consider playing one of these in your side deck. Just remember, the moment you turn off your normal summon, you are crippling other parts of your deck, so this really has to be worth it. Now, Super Polymerization is pretty interesting here. There is a card in the OCG that came out a few weeks ago. I do not know if this is confirmed for the TCG or how it will be imported, but this is very good against Yubel because it requires 2 Fiend and or Zombie monsters, and it also has a relevant effect where during your main phase, you can normal summon a monster. So Tenpai loves this because they can play Super Poly, and they can make this card and they can get a normal summon off their Dora Draco and also off their Tenpai Engine. It is also a level 6 Dark, which means that you can make Chaos Angel with a light and a dark as opposed to just lights. So this helps with the Tenpai matchup. Now, you don't need this to play Super Poly, because Super Poly, you can already play Mud Dragon and Garura, and your extra deck space will be getting tight if you play 3 targets for it. But I've generally found that Super Poly doesn't actually trade as well as you think it does, because you're using Super Poly and the card you discard for 2 cards, so you have to at least trade for 2 cards, and then the tempo shift has to make it worth it, so I'm undecided on this. I think it's good, it's not a mistake to main it, but I'm not sure. Then we have the Rabbit card. So this card is super generic, just 2 effect monsters, and this says, if this card is link summoned, you can set a continuous trap directly from your deck with an effect that special summons itself as a monster. Also, this card cannot be used as link material for the rest of the turn. Then, if a card is special summoned from the spell and trap zone to the monster zone, so the thing that you set, you can target a spell or trap your opponent controls and destroy it. So there are basically 2 targets that are being spoken about for this. The first is Azirune, which is basically a summon negation. And the second is Silhouette, which summons itself, and then it can target face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of illusion monsters you control, which would be 2, negate their effects. Now, these cards are very strong, and they do add a kind of ceiling to your deck, so it's not bad, but these are cards that you do not want to draw. Obviously, if you draw them, you can still make Rabbit, and this card will still be useful or whatever, but going second, it is a brick, and going first, you would have liked to have searched it, so I think it's generally not good for deck building, but they're still good cards, so it's not wrong to play it. Now, Silvera is standard, Arciela standard, Diabel standard. You don't need to play these at more than 1 because you recycle them. Chaos Angel, I think, is mandatory. You should be playing this card. In fact, I think that this card is so good that you could consider playing multiple ones. Formula Synchron is a super useful card because Diabel, let's see, when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can send a spell or trap from your hand or field to the graveyard, special summon a level 7 or lower tuner synchro monster from your extra deck, grave, or banishment. Now, normally, you're bringing out the Silvera to eclipse the field, and then you recycle it with your tuner, and then you Silvera again with Woes. I think that in a lot of cases, having an out-of-turn Chaos Angel for spot removal, which also guarantees that when you use Woes, your opponent can't use a monster effect to interact with the Silvera, is quite strong. And if Baron wasn't banned, this would probably be mandatory. Since it is banned, I think that maybe it's not mandatory, but I think that you could play this, even if you're on 1 Chaos Angel, and then you could maybe even consider 2 Chaos Angels for Formula Synchron. There is something very strange that I want to recommend here, which is Sinister Sovereign. Now, I play tested this card a lot when I first started playing Whitewoods, and the main problem with this card is that it requires a non-tuner worm monster. And you can play Draco Berserker, which is not as good as some of the alternatives in its slot, but it is extremely generic, so it's a very safe card to have in your main deck. And it is a worm monster. So you could use this as the non-tuner worm monster, because the tuner monster to go into Sinister Sovereign does not have to be a worm. And the reason that this card is good is because Whitewoods naturally has a super good grind game where as you go through your Silveras and so on in your opponent's turn, you're bringing back your own Asteria and you're adding your Rosette back to your hand. And this card makes grinding a lot easier because when your opponent special summons a monsters, you can banish one of them and burn for 12. Or when your opponent activates a spell or trap, you can banish that card and burn for 12. And you can use both of those in the same turn. So this is good for decks that maybe get a lot of value off of spells and traps and, it like trades pretty favorably. I don't think that you have to play this card, but it is worth considering if you're on Berserker anyhow. I did consider playing this card, Metaphys Horus, just to make the Sinister Sovereign easier, because this is also a worm. But this doesn't do anything going first. Going second, when it's summoned, you can target a face-up card on the field, negate its effect, so you can force out an opponent's interaction. I think this is very sus, and you'd have to be really going out of your way to use this to make Sinister Sovereign. But if you're already playing Draco Berserker, which is like a fine card, you could Draco Berserker Diabel as your end board or part of your end board, and then the Diabel would bring out the Formula Synchron after you've used Berserker once, and that would go into Sinister Sovereign. So I think that could be solid, especially in grindy type games. So that's just worth thinking about there. Tri-Edge Master and Stardust Charge Warrior are basically the same card. This being a light to go into Chaos Angel doesn't matter because all of your monsters are light anyhow. So yeah. The Fiendsmith package is more of a package, so I won't go over those right now. Gallant Granite I covered. Vorpgate is an extremely powerful, potentially blowout card against Yubel. You have to get through most of their interruptions first, and then when they're left with their monsters on field that you can't attack into, otherwise you'll kill yourself, this is really strong because it banishes all of them, and then you can just get rid of it, turn it into like an SP or something, and then you'll probably win the grind game. Ruddy Rose is very similar to that in the sense that you can banish their entire grave and then you can start playing your game again. And if they've gone through their resources, then that's good for you. I mentioned before that the Magistus main deck cards are not worth playing. However, you can play Zoroa, which is an extremely powerful floodgate that requires a spellcaster tuner, which is all of your tuners, and then a non-tuner monster. So it's a level 8, so it's very easy to go into. And this card equips any Magistus monster from the extra deck to it, and then your opponent cannot activate the effects of that type of monster. So if you summon this card and you equip a Fusion, or you equip a Link, or a Synchro, or an XYZ, your opponent cannot use effects of Links or Fusions or whatever you equipped. So this does not require the Magistus brick, but you can play it in your extra deck, so I think this is extremely powerful. The only reason I wouldn't main deck it is because it's not useful if I'm going second, but you could side deck like a Zoroa and then just the Fusion or just the Synchro. Nobody really plays super good XYZs, so probably not necessary. Packbit is a card that I think is pretty interesting. It is also useful against Yubel. It's not as much of a blowout as Ruddy Rose or Vorpgate, but it is a single target placing an opponent's monster into their spell and trap zone as a continuous trap. So it basically just gets rid of one of their Yubel monsters. And then it's an 8, so you could ladder into a Synchro 12 if you're on 12s. So the OCG, like almost every OCG list I've seen plays this card in Whitewoods. And I assume that most of it is for Yubel. Also, if you're on the Centurion package, you can place your own Centurion cards from your grave back into your trap zone, and then you can continue recycling them. So if you're on the Centurion build, I think that this is a very, very useful card that you consider main decking. Now, Adamancipator Rise Dragite, I think is generally not that good. It's a spell or trap negate, but if you are playing Coral Dragon, maybe because you don't have access to the Fiendsmith cards, like you don't want to pay for them, and so you don't have the Dies Irae negate, which can usually negate like a spell or trap or whatever, then I think that you could consider playing Coral Dragon as one of your Synchro 6s, maybe over the Tri-Edge, and then you could play Dragite as your spell and trap negate, and that's, okay. Baguska is very useful against shifter decks, so if there's some degenerates at your locals who are playing Flu, then you just maybe have to sit on a Baguska and hope that you live. This I haven't found to be super useful in like lots of other contexts, but the card is also just very strong. Lina, I think, because we're going into a Fiendsmith meta, is very good for getting access to your opponent's Fiendsmith cards and then making your own Fiendsmith plays. If you are not playing Fiendsmiths, I would not recommend playing this card. I've seen some people using Muddy Mud Dragon to go into Dragoon. Let's see how I'm doing for time. Oh my god, 18 minutes. And I just don't think that you need the Omni Negate, especially if you were playing Fiendsmith, because you already have different types of negations. So I don't think that I would play these cards. But it is worth knowing that you can make Muddy Mud Dragon and go into Dragoon. The Zolkin Crystal Wind package, I think, is not necessary. I don't think you need that type of monster negate, especially if you're on the Fiendsmith package because of Dies Irae. I don't think it's wrong to play because it's easy to make like a Stardust Charge Warrior or a Tri-Edge Master and link it or synchro off with the Arciella to go into this. But yeah, I'm not super sold on it. So that is my general overview for now. If there's something that I have forgotten or that you want me to comment on, leave it in the comments below and I will respond to your comments. So thanks for watching.